Hi, everyone, and thank you for letting me participate in this way. I'm very sorry I couldn't be here with you today. I'm going to tell you about the data brief that the Student Loan Law Initiative produced and which I presented to the Department of Education's negotiated rulemaking recently, addressing one of the department's requests regarding information about student loan borrowers experiencing hardship. So let me just first share my screen. And this is work with Jonathan Glader, who's there with you today, and Sultana Fauzia, who's our postdoc at the Student Loan Law Initiative, as well as Marshall Steinbaum, an economist. And again, it's all available online. I'm going to give you a very short, version of it here. So the context here is that the department is currently engaged in a round of negotiated rulemaking to effectuate some form of cancellation. That is their stated purpose. And they've asked in memos, they've asked for several things, and there have been negotiations about several issues. This, what we're addressing here is directed at the question that they posed of what are the different potential types of hardship that borrowers may continue to face, and how might the department address those cases of hardship? So it is both about the sort of areas in which there may be hardship, as well as how the department can address them. We at SLLI have been for the last year and a half or so engaged in research using the Consumer Credit Panel at the University of California, which we helped create. And we've been doing we've been issuing these data briefs. So there's actually data brief number 3, where we've basically taken a look at the credit report information available of student loan borrowers. The credit panel has 100% of California borrowers, just anyone, not just student loan, but just anyone has a credit report in California, and a 2% national sample. For this study, we're using the 2% national sample, although some of the data briefs before delved into the California sample. We only observe the kinds of things that you might see in your credit report. So where we're addressing hardship, really we're talking about certain kinds of hardship that are observable on a credit report. This is not the extent of all kinds of hardships, of course, but it does have the beauty that it can be observed easily and kind of neutrally, and potentially any kind of policy decisions based on it do not require extensive, documentation from the borrower. So we looked at 6 different potential measures of hardship, which are listed here, and the highlighted ones are the ones that I'm going to focus on just in terms of time. And the idea here is these are things that are observable in the credit report that denote some kind of problem. Now, we're not saying this is sort of like a holistic thing, and our recommendations, which I'm going to tell you about next, are based on all of these together, not any single one of them. So just to tell you the sort of punchline first, we make 2 recommendations to the department in answering their question. We basically request that the department reduce student debt to 0 for the student debt of borrowers in the bottom half of the income distribution of student borrowers, which currently is about household incomes below $71,000. So we think that our data that I'm going to show you next essentially supports that position. We also suggest that the department should cancel enough debt to reduce the student debt to income ratios of to at most 30%. So student debt to income, at most 30% to the income of borrowers who are in the sort of middle of the distribution, of the income distribution, from the median to the 90th percentile. So you can see in the slide is between 71 and 131 thousand in household income. So those are our recommendations. How do we come up with those recommendations? So again, I'm going to show you 4 of the graphs that we produce in the report. And there's a lot to look at here, so I'll try to walk you through it. So basically, we have separated the lines. The horizontal lines are the student debt to income ratios of various groups, right? So we're making recommendations about the bottom two groups. In blue is the bottom 50th percentile of income, 71,000 and below. The red is in between, and then we're not making any recommendation about the top 10% percentile of the income distribution. Here you can see essentially one of the main thrusts of our recommendation is shown pretty nicely here, in that you start to see, if you see zero on the horizontal axis, is a student debt to income ratio of like you have no student debt. There's not, we are only looking at student debtors here, but essentially it's just you have like $1 of student debt is what you're looking at. And you can see that as soon as there's any kind of student debt to income, positive number, that is, you have any student debt at all, you see a dramatic drop in the credit score of the people in the bottom 50th percentile. Slightly less dramatic drop in the middle for the red line, but it really dramatic here. And that you're looking at 2020 Q1 before the pandemic, and 2023 Q3, which was the latest available data when we did this analysis. The other measure that we looked at is home ownership. The idea is, how much is, and there's actually documented studies about this, that, home ownership is depressed among student loan borrowers, and that student debt is part of the reason for that depression, or that smaller numbers. And you can see here again a dramatic drop in the bottom 50th percentile of income, in terms of how just so much, how as soon as there's any student debt at all, this is associated with a big drop in the home ownership rate. So a lower home ownership rate is worse, obviously. And you can again see the same or something similar for the other groups as well, but not nearly as dramatic. Credit utilization, this isn't like a hard and fast rule, but the idea is that, like, if you have, this is like a sort of commonly held belief that if you are, your credit utilization is greater than 30%, you're using more than 30% of your available credit in your usually revolving credit lines, that's not good financial sense, and that is indicative. It both lowers your credit score and is like indicative of potential issues, that you might be overextending yourself. And here we see, for the bottom, look at the green line at the bottom, the lower credit utilization, the better. They're below, like, the entire observation period, they're below. And that 30th percent of credit utilization, whereas the bottom 50% of income is, much higher. And as soon as you see that big jump now in the other way from before, because here higher credit utilization is worse, and there's a dramatic jump, as soon as there's any student debt. And again, that's the basis for our main recommendation of erasing the debts of those at the bottom 50th of the 50th% of the income distribution. This is the last one I'll talk about just for time's sake. Severe delinquency. So the definition here that we're using is where the borrower is observed to have at least one loan with a payment that is 90 days, 3 months past due. And again, you can actually, it's even people in the higher income distribution are, having, have a perhaps higher than expected delinquency rate here. But again, you can see this sort of difference here. It's a little more more erratic in this context. You can see, like, there's actually a slightly lower delinquency for the bottom 50th percentile, and then kind of a jump at an inflection point on the student debt to income ratio of something like, 0.1 or something like that. And then again, it jumps up. So again, we also looked at public records like bankruptcies, and I'm going to stop sharing. We looked at public records and auto loan amortizations, and it's sort of similar in terms of the sort of breaking points that we identified. And this is the basis for essentially, providing to the department this information, which they requested. They wanted data, and it just so happened that we had been working with this data set for a year and a half. It took us like 8 months to produce the first data brief, just because it's such a a complex data set to get our hands on or a handle on. What's going to happen next? So the rulemaking allegedly ended. It was the last negotiation round in December, just before the holidays, when I presented this report. But there was a big outcry from the negotiators because the department did not actually put forth any language suggesting what they might do on hardship. And you can't really have a negotiation if there's nothing to negotiate about. They just said they wanted to hear things, et cetera. So what we're hearing is that there might be another roundtable, perhaps with language, or at the very least another roundtable where they get to discuss the issue of hardship, because it was only discussed for about 40 minutes after all is said and done, which is really quite little for such a big category. So we're hopeful that, basically there'll be another chance, and hopefully the department will actually have some language that the negotiators can react to, which would then be part of the rulemaking. The idea here is that the rulemaking will, there will be a draft rule sometime in, well, originally January, possibly now February, and then in the summer, we'd have a final rule after, a comment period, et cetera. And to us, the hardship category is, sort of the best one to reach the largest number of people and to reach people who are really struggling, but don't fit the other categories like age or an age of loans, that the department has already identified, which are much narrower. In some ways, what you can see from our data is that just any student debt for many people is a hardship, at least as we define it. And again, we think that this is super under-inclusive, in that we are only observing these measures and not so many others that could be indicative of hardship. But at the same time, given that it's a rulemaking, that we need data, and that the ideal situation is one in which the administration does whatever it does in a way that does not require lengthy attestations or, documentation from borrowers, so that it can actually get the relief that they need as quickly as possible, and especially to the people who really need it. This seems like a way that the department could go that would be grounded in, the best available data and would actually reach, many people. So that's the hope. Thanks again for letting me participate in this way. I'm sorry I can't be there with you. Thank you to Jonathan for putting this together, to Luke for moderating, and to Eileen and Bonnie for participating. I look forward to listening to the recording.